Thank you so much, sir, for finding some time to devote with us for this academic cause. And I will hand over now to Vijay sir for the lecture. And meanwhile, if any student have any question, please use chat box. We will entertain the questions in the last 30 minutes, or if or sir can take it at a time. It's on, sir. So please use the chat box for the same. It's over to you, sir.
Thank you, Gautam, and welcome everyone to this particular session of Consti class. I understand this is the fourth session wherein we are talking about state and the law. And in fact, this is the precursor to your fundamental rights topics. And I see your schedule, and there are three topics on which specifically devoted to fundamental rights. And this particular part, in fact, begins with this section, section 12, and that is what we will be discussing in this lecture. Now, the lecture is for about 2 hours. However, I feel that we will have more interaction. This is what I am into. So please use as much you want to use the chat box, as well as you can use the mics. I hope your mics are enabled. If not, I will request Gautam, please enable the mic so that the students can use the mic. And you can speak and ask questions, and let us have a healthy discussion over here on this topic. Before I proceed with the topic, let me pose a poll so that I can see whether you are in sleep or you are really attentive for the lecture. So let us quickly have the response from your side so that I know exactly how do you feel about this. $39 still to go. Ideally, my experience in this Blackboard class is that there are always some no responses, but I believe it's a voluntary class, so I will have zero no response. This is what I am aiming at. Let us see. It's 27 no response yet. Okay, 25 no responses, 24, 22. Well, so you can see the results on your screens, and you can note that there is an overwhelming majority which says that there is a need of a governance to run the government, to run the governance of the country, and self-governance, maybe it won't serve the purpose. So let us hear one representative each. If people who have responded no, if any one of you can raise hand and speak. Why do you think so? That government is not needed and self-governance will help? Anyone can do that. And some of you can write in the chat box so that I can use your statements from there. Yeah, Anushka Agarwal, Arnab, Bhavya, Chetna, any one of you. can speak. Divang. Yes. Can I get some response in your chat box or otherwise? Yes, Mukesh, Muskan, please go ahead.
Sir, even though I have said yes in the poll, still I would like to say that self-governance can also do sometimes, because the Constitution of India being the supreme law of our country, it provides for the rights and obligations of the citizens as well. So if we have certain obligations for the state to follow, even we have certain duties as a citizens to follow. So in that case, self-governance, if we know about the rules and regulations and about the law as per the constitution, then I guess in certain circumstances, the self-governance can also do.
Okay.
That is my
Okay, I
opinion.
take your point. Okay, fine. So you are basically saying that if everybody is educated and knowing the rights and duties, then self-governance will can do. But at the same time, you also say that the government.
Yes, sir. I yes in the poll, but I had some different point of view in this regard.
Okay, that's great. Shrestha, I think your response is quite long. So if you can speak, it will be great, because reading this much of a long response in chat box is difficult.
Uh,
Mm,
am I audible?
yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So the reason which I opted for the answer as no is because the core value of democratic self-governance and inclusive governance is actual is I think I find is the equal opportunity and participation and equal treatment of law, which is the basic need to sustain a democratic society in our country. And this implies that all people have the right to participate meaningfully in governance process and influence decisions that affect them. And so, therefore, there is a requirement for a self-government rather than have a government who actually that shows, but I don't see the actual participation of our citizens in this country in policy law in lawmaking policy. So, therefore, I believe there's a requirement for self-governance.
Okay, so you don't want the government, or you want both, like self-governance as well as the government?
So, both, I would suggest.
Okay, both. And in what
Yeah.
proportion? Like if you have to give rate them into percentage, so what percentage should be with the
Uh,
government and what percentage?
so basically, I was following the idea of one of the Scandinavian countries in Scandinavian countries. I don't remember the name of this particular counters in which these called states, where there is direct governance system is there. So they follow a proportionate of 70 is to 30%, where 70% is the actual participation of the people, whereas in 30% the government participates in the lawmaking. So I believe that this particular standard is required in India.
Okay, so you believe that 70% should be left to the people and then 30% should be there with the
Yes, sir.
government, right?
Yes, sir.
So this is what is
Yes.
your point. Okay,
Yes.
that is fair enough point. Thank you, Shrest. That was wonderful
Thank
hearing
you.
you. Shubhangi, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
I completely agree with what Shresth and Muskan have raised the points, except Shrest's proportion which he has stated. I have voted for yes, government should be there, because though Muskan and Shresth are correct that yes, self-governance help, and if people are educated, they know the law. However, if we go by theory of positive law given by Austin, that law is command of sanction. So, irrespective of the fact that how educated a country gets, irrespective of the fact that everyone is following the law and everyone is obeying the law, everyone is living peacefully. However, sanction needs to be there to maintain that. Like if in a society a society is living peacefully, to maintain that peacefulness, sanction has to be there, and government brings in that sanction. Therefore, I have voted yes for the government, and for the point which Shresh said that proportion should be 70 and 30. Yes, proportion should be 70 and 30, but in the reverse form. Like it is my opinion that 70% should be government's um, interaction, government's power, and 30% should be left for self governance of the people. That is my take on it. So
Okay, that is a good one, Shubhangi. Thanks a lot. You have reversed the proportion which Shrest was pointing out, and that was quite interesting. Well, anyone else who would like to use the mic and speak, please feel free to do so. In the meanwhile, I am reading the chat box, and I find Nirali says government can just make the law or come up with certain punishment, but it is completely on individual first to have self-governance. Okay, Nirali, good thought, but just reflect upon yourself that whether it is being self-governed and people are self-governed. The government is required to, Priyanshi says, government is required to maintain the rules and laws in the country. However, self-government will not help as people have different mindset and different opinions. Exactly. So Nirali and Priyanshi, settle your questions amongst yourself and maybe in the group, because both of you said divergent points. Coming to Tanishq says, for self-governance to work, there is a need for people to be self-reliant and civil in every manner. And I think we as a nation are still far from there. Okay, so Tanishq, basically we need to teach civility to people. This is what is your point, and then maybe we prepare them to reach there. That is great. Tanishq. Dhwaja, yes, you can go ahead, Dhwaja.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, sir. So I believe that government is required because it brings uniformity in the system. Also, I completely agree with what Shubhangi Gupta Didi said, that even though a society, most of the people are educated and learned, but still there are some evil minds. And even though a person is intelligent and learned and educated, but still can have evil mind. To govern those kind of people, we need to have a system and people who have power and authority to govern those people. So there, of course, there should be self-governance because that is what makes a country complete. Involvement of people in decision making and other things. But to handle the problems at primary level, there should be a government.
Okay, right. That is good. Thank you for that input. And we have Aprajita Jha giving a very long answer. Aprajita, please use your mic. Neha Virmani talking about why we need a government is because every human being has his own way of thinking. Yes, we have got this. And sir, let's equate this concept to the bad man's theory. Okay, Shrest, you have to explain me that what is bad man's theory. I
Okay,
regret
am I,
I'm not able to relate it. Yeah.
am I audible?
Yes, please.
So, bad master is the concept actually given by Sir Oliver Wendell Holmes, where he states that nobody can justify the concept except a criminal who is accused of an offense in a particular courtroom. So, sir, let us equate
Mm-hmm.
this particular theory to ourselves. We, the citizens of India, are in a much better position to evaluate what laws we require and what laws we need. Sir, there's no doubt that the government makes policy and these policies are implemented. But if you look at the
Mm-hmm.
whole scenario and take as statistical data, so I did an empirical study in 2018, and I find that the ratio was divided into 10 is to 50 in such a mere ratio that we cannot say that absolute percentage of people want this particular policy and this particular percentage of population does not want this policy. So if we had a self-governance system, I believe the actual opinion, like what Montesquieu described in a spirit of laws, that let us make laws which the opinion of the people have them. That was in Roman ancient time also. So I believe that yes, self-governance is actually should have a higher pedestal as compared to the government policies.
Okay, That's fine. You made your point and you want to justify it. That is perfectly
Yes,
fine.
sir.
But I have my basic questions which Pratyaksha has asked, and that is basically this is a country wherein you have to still teach the people how to go to toilet and how to use the toilet, right? So this is the country wherein you have to teach the people how to remain clean, and this is the country where you have to teach the people how to follow the rules, where to go on the road. So I have my own doubts, but at the same time, thought is interesting, and that is what the father of the nation also thought. And since today is his day, I thought that I will bring this particular question first and mark his thought process on this of Swaraj when he spoke about. When he said about Swaraj, he said self-reliant. He said self-reliant not in the sense of Atmanirbhar, but he said self-reliant in the sense of self-governance. He said that it should be like people should be self-governed, and that was his idea of Swaraj. And we all remember him today on this day, as well as one another stalwart, Lal Bahadur Shastri, with whom we relate today. But again, his also towards peace and international committee, as well as about the farmers and the Jawans. I believe this is something which goes round and round and round, discussion which we keep on. But yes, if you look at it from a utopian perspective, there's definitely you need to think like, yes, self-governance is the best way. But when you are looking at a country with a population of 130 crores, the question arises as to what kind of system you want, whether the self-governance will work in this particular country. So this is something which needs to be looked at it, and that is what we are talking about here. And that is the idea with which we are talking about the system. And today's discussion and debate, we will actually revolve around these aspects. And this is what exactly we will do. I thought to ask you this particular question because my son is in class 6th and he is studying law and civil society, and one topic which is for them is governance. I probably you people must have studied at your places when you were reading civics or this law and the societal thing like social science I'm talking about. So one day I saw my younger son, who is just 1 year in class 1, and he was having a book and he was making some diagram or something. And I asked him, "What are you doing?" So his response was that, "Yes, I am making a city and I am making a government, and I will be the king of that particular city, and then I will govern." Like, why do you want to govern? Because, and he said that I will have power, and this particular power I can exercise, and then I will have people to work for me, and this is how the system will work. Now it is quite an interesting thought, and when that intrigued me, and when I took this particular topic to teach you all and have a discussion with, in fact I should not say teach you all, because you have already been taught this particular topic. An idea of this class is to brainstorm beyond that. So when we say this state, the idea of state has emerged, and it has a strong relationship with sovereignty. How do you protect it? And it is about bringing order in society, bringing law and order in society. Who will do it? There are two options. One is that self-governance you can do, people can govern themselves. But as points out here, that there are different mindset, there are different people with different thoughts, and that is where you come down to democracy, right? Wherein you say that let majority decide, then what happens to the minority? So that is again a big question, right? So that is why you need to have a system, and that particular system sets these things right. That if majority goes against minority, then what happens to the right of the minority? If the state does some excesses, what happens to that excesses when there is a stoppage which needs to be brought up? And that is what exactly where the discussion during the constitution is debates, and they came up with a thought, and then they incorporated or they brought up this constitution. And if you will talk about self-governance from a marking perspective, or you can say from a perspective of philosophy, you can look at it. This is the constitution which is given by the people of, okay, we the people of India give the constitution to ourselves, right? So basically, ultimately, the government which is there, who is that? Who is that particular state? And this is what is my next question. Who is that particular state? When you say that there is a state, who is this state? This state is basically the representative of the people. People have voted it, and people have brought it into the system, and they are deciding on behalf of whom? On behalf of the people. Right? So we, the people of India, govern ourselves through the constitution, and that is why the constitution provides different norms, different rules, different regulations through which the people are governed, through which the state is governed, through which the all stakeholders who are there in the country are governed. Now, this is something which is there, but now the question arises that what do you mean by this state? What is this particular state? So let us look at this aspect and try to find out as to who is this state. Now, when you ask a question, who is state? What are your points on that? Who do you think is a state? A sovereign nation is a state. Okay. What else? Who is a state? Parliament is a state. Okay, Aprajita, right? Authority to whom we have given power is a state. Okay, right? So how do you relate the authority, government or authority? Okay, one which ideally protects your basic rights is a state. Okay, Prachi, that's a in thought. Okay, Dhwaja, indirectly, but citizens, okay, citizens of the country are the state indirectly, okay, because we say that constitution, we the people of India give the constitution to us. So yeah, body which acts for public interest, okay, they want to, that's a good thought. Body which acts within in well-defined territory, okay. State is accumulation of people where one have power to govern and the other have given power to be governed. Okay, Bhavya, that is the interesting one. And there is a document also to set these particular rights, that how much you can govern and how much I can be governed, right? And this is what exactly is the constitution. So that's a interesting definition coming up there, Bhavya. Rukmani, polity under a system of governance, okay, and who control the number of people. Okay, Tarun, okay, how many numbers? Probably 130 crores, or maybe if you take the state's population, I'm talking about the individual states, then definitely that population of that state. Okay, maintain law and order, body which is made by public to maintain law and orders. Okay, body which acts for welfare of citizens, a body which falls under Article 12. Okay, Shikhar Bhardwaj, thank you for that. Article 12. So basically, a body which falls under Article 12 is the state, but only for the purpose of Part 3 of the Constitution, right? So Part 3 of the Constitution, since I told you that we will talk about the definition of state in the context of Part 3 of the Constitution, and it is important to note that, and why we are talking about it is very, very important. We will talk about it. But just give a thought to this newspaper articles which is visible to you right now. And you can see the first headline, Kashmir is now Union's territory. Now, when you say this, there's a quite an interesting and intense debate which I had on the constitutional law. And it talks about the power of the center and power of the state and the discussions around that. So vis-a-vis when you talk about parliament and vis-a-vis the state legislature, or when you talk about the Supreme Court and the high courts, or when you talk about the state's power and the center's power and I think in the present days and circumstances, there is a lot of debate around it happening. Idea of these particular debates and these particular questions is surrounding around what? Or it is surrounding around power. Now the question is that you will find and see that the political parties are having a lot of difference if there is a different political party at the center and there is a different political party at the state. Now the question arises that the same set of people have chosen the political party at the center and the same set of people have chosen political party in the state, right? So it is that is how it works. It is quite an interesting dimension. So how there are two different kinds of thoughts which are in power in the state and the center. So this discussion probably you people can have when I believe center-state relations are being discussed, and the professor or the resource person who will be talking about that, you can bring this particular here. But my agenda is not to discuss that. But there are larger dimensions when you talk about the definition of the state under the Constitution. But we are concentrating ourselves to part 3 of the Constitution. And why we are concentrating on part 3? Because part 3 is a very significant, important part which talks about fundamental rights. And fundamental rights are available only against the state. It is not against the private individual, right? So your legal rights are available against the individual, but the fundamental rights are available against the state. But at the same time, if somebody else is disturbing or affecting your fundamental right, it is also the duty of the state to protect your fundamental rights, right? So it is basically an overarching duty on the state to protect fundamental rights of everyone. At the same time, if there are two people who are fighting and there is a fundamental rights in question, the idea between these two people who are the private people is not the duty of the state here. So basically it is like one person A and B. Say for example, if I may take your names, so Vishal's fundamental right, if violated by Shikhar, then in that particular situation, Article 12 or maybe the Constitution doesn't get attracted. However, if the state fails in protecting Vishal from the aggression, then in that situation, probably the state has to intervene. And if the state fails to do that, then Vishal would have a remedy to go to the court to say that state has failed in its duty to protect me. So these kinds of instances many a times you will receive, and there are a lot of issues which comes around. Maybe recently you have read about the huge migrants heading from one state to another, one state saying that yes, take away your people, and sons of the soil theory, so people being told that you belong to that state and not this state, and maybe a lot of issues. Recently, you would have witnessed a jurisdictional clash between the police in Maharashtra and Bihar. So that kind of a discussion. So just think and reflect. Why I'm bringing up these particular questions before you is that you should reflect upon them and think whatever discussion today we are going to have on the state part. Now, you see there is another point which came up was citizens don't have absolute right over their bodies, and this was in the context of can you tell me the context of this? Yeah, any one of you? Yes. Antara COVID, death and cremation. So basically it said that this was in relation to that, as well as it was in relation to one point that is called your deciding your death, like that is called when you get permission to die. What is that term called? I'm just forgetting that particular term. Please, anyone? Euthanasia. Thank you, Muskan, for that particular word, euthanasia. So this is what is the discussion and debate which is happening around. So by now you know exactly who is the state and what is the state we are talking about. Let us now talk about the definition under the Constitution, because I believe Today, you people want to discuss this aspect, and we need you through that. But before we go ahead with this, let us talk about constitutional governance also. Now, when I say constitutional governance, this is a very, very important term. And constitutional governance is important because I have asked you people, and majority of you, in fact, overwhelming majority of you said that we need government. However, at the same time, government should have some mechanism to be governed. So it cannot be like the power which is completely conferred on the government and they just go berserk. That is not possible. So basically, the constitution provides for the different articles in which the government is being given the power, and the government has also been given the restriction, or the boundaries are provided there, and the government is not supposed to go beyond that particular boundaries. So it is very, very important for the government to stick to those particular boundaries. And there are boundaries which are set for central government, there are boundaries which are set for state government, and there are some boundaries which is permeable in nature for central government, wherein it can go into the state's domain under the concurrent list. This is what the governance is all about. Over and above, we have judiciary, which keeps the constitutional governance in check. And many a times you will find that there is a lot of debate around this as well, that to what extent the Supreme Court or the High Courts can intervene in the state's functioning, and to what extent the the governments can legislate going contrary to the decisions of the courts. And ultimately, when there were too much of a legislation happening around that particular period, the Constitution, the Supreme Court came up with the principles in Keshavananda Bharati case, wherein they said that there is something called basic feature you cannot change in the basic feature of the Constitution. Now, I am a very big critique of that basic feature thing. I personally believe that there is nothing called basic feature. What kind of a basic feature we are talking about? This country is, thousand years old. For every set of generation, for every set of generation, there would have been a basic feature. So the basic feature also keeps changing as per the situations. So maybe you can say that today this is the, like, say, the biggest example which you people could debate and think around would be the NJAC, that is National Judicial Accountability Bill. Now, and the same question arises when I say the state and the law, whether like who all can come under the definition of the state, and we will have a discussion soon. So these dimensions opens up as a debate to discuss. But ultimately, if you look at the constitutional governance, idea of constitutional governance is that there has to be checks and balance. So though we don't say that there is a strict separability of these three pillars, executive, judiciary, and legislature, but they need to be working in separate space, because you cannot encroach upon each other's domain. This is something which the Constitution tells and Constitution says, and the constitutional governance is all about that. That howsoever big you become, howsoever big you are, the law will always be above you. This is what Lord Hailsham said, and this is what is actually also the focus of the principle of rule of law. So principle of rule of law, all must know, was given by Edward Coke, and Edward Coke gave this particular, and this comes from a French phrase called La Principale Legati, and this was further developed by A.V. Dicey in 1800s. And idea of this particular rule of law is that the government or whosoever, the subjects, all are governed by the rules which are set under the Constitution or the legislations which are prepared, right? So this is what constitutional governance is all about. Now, when I say constitutional governance, you need to have particular definitions of things in the Constitution so that you are aware or there are boundaries which are set, because once you define that particular role, you are setting responsibilities on people. That whose responsibility was this? Say, for example, when I say fundamental rights and there is a breach of a fundamental rights, we ask the question, whose responsibility was this to look at this particular breach? Now, when I say rule of law, the word comes law, and there is also a big question which arises around it, that what do you mean when you say this particular thing, term law? Now, before I go into the discussion on state, let us talk about Article 13 first, because then we will be in a better position to understand state. So first, let us take Article 13. Article 13 gives you a very, very important article, and it sets the context for the Constitution, as well as it's the context to the definition of law. And it provides the definition. Without further ado, let me take you to the definition. And if you talk about, somehow my slides have gone up and down. I don't know why this has happened, but you can see here it is Article 13, which says laws inconsistent with, in derogation of fundamental rights, right? And the definition talks, there are two prominent parts of this definition. The first part is all laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement of the Constitution, insofar as they are inconsistent with the provisions of this part, shall, to the extent of such inconsistency, be void. So this is subclause 1, Article 13 sub 1. And then we have Article 13 subclause 2, which talks about the state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the rights conferred by this part, and any law made in contravention of this clause shall, to the extent of the contravention, be void. Now, this is the article basically. So whenever we read any statute or the Constitution, it is our prime duty to read the bare text first. So we should read the bare text and then start the interpretation and discuss the terms. Now, law has been defined. If you look at Article 13.3 and 13.3a, it talks about law, and it says that law will include ordinance, it will include order, bylaw, rule, regulations, and its different nature, it has mentioned, which is having in the territory of India the force of law. And then it also talks about law in force. Basically, that is a law which has been passed by the legislature or competent authority and the territory of India before the commencement of this Constitution. So this basically talks about that. Now here the important clauses are clause 1 and clause 2. So if you can throw some light on this so that I understand as to what is to what extent you understand this subclause 1 and subclause 2. Use the chat box, use your mic as you wish. What is your reflection, and what do you understand from this Article 13? Any one of you can pick up and you can type in the chat box. Yeah. Okay. State shall not make any law which abridges any right under Part 3 or inconsistent with any provisions of the Constitution. Okay. Retrospective effect to the extent of consistency. Okay. Right. Shubhangi. Fine. Doctrine of severability. Yeah. So basically Article 13, if you look at it, as Gautam in the initial remarks mentioned, that it talks about three things mainly. One, actually establishes the judicial review, the principle of judicial review, because by virtue of this 13.1 and 13.2, the courts under the Constitution gets power to review the legislation, to review the law, or in fact to review all these terms which is mentioned in 13.3a, that is ordinance, order, bylaw, rule, regulation, notification, custom, usage, All these things they can review if they are inconsistent with part 3 of the Constitution. That is, part 3 is your fundamental rights. So any thing which is inconsistent with the fundamental rights, that can be reviewed by the judiciary. This is what is a power which power of judicial review is drawn under Article 30. This is one set of point which comes out of it. Another two important set of point which comes under Article 13 is that by a stroke of Article 13(1), you can find that it legitimizes the law pre-constitution. So can anybody tell me what is the date of the constitution enforcement? Come on, that is a quite a easy question. Any one of you can answer. I hope you people are not Googling it. 26th November 1950, or it is January? Okay, now I think there is a conflict. 49 also is coming up. 49, 50, 49, 50. Okay. 26th November 1949. Vishal, I think I should do a poll on this, huh? You people are Googling or what? 26 January 1950, 26 January 1950. So I have started getting the right answers basically, because probably we made by November, but finally adopted on 26 January. Okay, that's good. So 26 January 1950. Okay, what is this A394? I don't know. It's Priyanshik. 26 November, we adopted it in 26 January. So enforcement date is 26 January 1950, and this is the date when the Article 13 came into. So what has happened is, by this 13(1), the laws which existed before 26 January 1950 were all recognized. Okay, so this is the purport of 13(1). So what it says, it is all recognized, but recognized what? Recognized to the extent of consistency, and that was the word which was used by, I think, Shubhangi used that. And this is what exactly is the point here in 13(1). So to the extent of the consistency, the laws which are there, so they are not void ab initio, right? So they are not void ab initio, but they are void to the extent of inconsistency. And that is what also brings up the point doctrine of severability, which basically tries to sever the enforceable part and non-enforceable part of a legislation. Now that is something which is about the legislation which were in vogue before the constitution came into existence. But there are laws. What subclause 2 says? It says prohibits the state from making laws which would take away right or abridge the right of the people conferred under this part, or any law made in contravention of this clause will be void. So what it is talking about is the subsequent laws after 26th January 1950, whether these particular laws enacted by whether the state will have power to enact any law which is inconsistent with part 3. And 13(2) says that the state would not have that particular power to enact a legislation or a law which is inconsistent with part 3 of the Constitution. So basically the difference between 13(1) and 13(2) is that 13(1) tells you that the laws automatically doesn't get void. 13(2), the law automatically get void, and they in fact use the word stillborn. So basically it is not about law coming into existence and dying. It is about a birth of a law which is dead already. So this is something which is the difference between Article 13(1) and 13(2). You get this difference. We will get more clarity once I move into the doctrines specifically. So doctrine of eclipse. This is a doctrine of eclipse actually is a situation which helps in a number of ways. So if you have to read a latest decision on this topic, you should refer to Mahendra Lal Jain versus the State of UP. It's 1963 decision, and is a decision wherein they have compared doctrine of eclipse as well as doctrine of severability. Read this decision. This is an important decision for you if you are talking about this doctrine. But my experience says that, you know, doctrine of eclipse and doctrine of eclipse as such is of not much relevance nowadays, because it talks about pre-constitutional laws. So once a while, maybe some legislation which will be in question will come for interpretation of the court, and that too has a stop. Probably, I think in 1960s there were plenty of legislation which came before court for interpretation, wherein doctrine of eclipse had to be utilized. And ultimately, if you go ahead, it was go ahead with Keshavan Madhavan Menon, and then later on, Ram Khurshid. These were the decisions through which it started, taking a seed, because there were some legislations, like for example, in this Keshavan's case, there was a legislation like Indian Press Emergency Powers Act of 1931, which was to be implemented, which went inconsistent with 19(1)(a), that is freedom of speech, and that was held to be not permissible. However, you would note that reasonable restrictions were imposed in which amendment of the Constitution brought reasonable restriction in Article 19. Any one of you? (19)(6). So after that particular thing came this doctrine of eclipse applied. So basically, if you look at it, the doctrine of eclipse says that if there is a law which was in existence before, that is pre-constitutional law, and that particular law came in conflict with part 3 of the Constitution, any of the provisions, then that particular law will not be applicable, right? So it will not be like the whole act won't become unconstitutional. That particular provision will be eclipsed for that period, because subsequently, suppose if the fundamental right itself undergoes a change, like for example, if you look at this Bhikaji Narayan Dakas case, this related to a license of motor vehicles, right? And if you would note, there were reasonable restriction, as I pointed out. It again came out, and there you will also note that right to property was also taken away from the Constitution, and that is also that is also taken into consideration in another case. So basically, what happens here is that in doctrine of eclipse, the Constitution provision, Constitution, due to the Article 13(1), the law which is pre-Constitution does not apply basically to a situation. And however, subsequently, if the Constitution makes some changes in the Part 3 itself, then if the law becomes enforceable subsequently, the eclipse is removed. So this is what doctrine of eclipse is. So as Supreme Court said in Bhikaji Narayan case, that that the effect of amendment was to remove the shadow and to make the impugned act free from all blemish or infirmity. So it is basically cleaning the law, laundering the law from the eclipse. So this is what was the situation in Bhikaji Narayan, subsequently also upheld in Mahendra Lal Jain. And as Shrest point out, triple case, I have not referred to that case. So Shrest, if you can just put any thought on that, if you are about aware about the exact reference there, would be happy to hear from you. Yeah, Tarunveer, go ahead, please.
Am I audible?
Yeah, your voice is a bit less, but still go ahead.
Okay, sir, basically, Sir Justice Kehar, in his dissenting opinion, stated that it is a duty of the parliament to make law for this particular regard, and therefore we should not struck down this particular law as unconstitutional. Rather than we should set aside
Which
and
law? Which law you are talking about?
so this in this particular triple talaq, sir, talaq-e-bad law one, sir, in Shaira Banu case.
Okay, fine.
Okay,
But
as
again, which law
he
was
there,
in question? Like which law was in question?
sir,
Because personal
I'm
laws
not
are not subject
yes,
to this.
yes, I'm not able to recollect which first law was there in question, sir.
Yeah, no, personal laws are not in question. That is what I'm saying. So
Yes,
personal
sir.
law doesn't come into the purview of this discussion.
Yes. Yes, sir. But the majority one said that it is unconstitutional. So therefore, this particular dissenting opinion highlighted the doctrine of, or rather say, he emphasized on this particular doctrine of eclipse that in this particular case it should be allowed.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's a good point. But I have not read that, so I will
Okay, sir.
excuse myself from that discussion. But still, any one of you would like to throw some light on this, we'll be happy to take it. Okay. There were also two other decisions. Yes, Prachi, doctrine of eclipse is only for part 3 of the Constitution. Yes, but generally speaking, this kind of a thing also cannot apply to the post-constitutional laws. No? So, if anything which is applied to post-constitutional law, then that will be void per se. It will be stillborn. So, the legislation has to come up again, afresh. There cannot be amended. So see, for example, if a legislation is held unconstitutional, that legislation cannot be amended. And the say for example, Supreme Court says that this is the clause which is or this is the legislation which is unconstitutional. So by way of an amendment, the law cannot be cured. So that has to be done by way of a parliament coming up with a fresh legislation. So they will come as a new legislation. Then only that can be cured. This is what the doctrine of eclipse like this is what is the purport of doctrine of eclipse. I will give you two more instances. There was one instance which related to section 309 of the IPC. So if people know, section 309 of the IPC criminalizes attempt to suicide. There was a case which in Rathinam's case, you people know, wherein the section 309 of IPC was challenged, and court said that right to life includes right to die, and Rathinam case recognized that. So during that particular period, this 309 was held to be unconstitutional as per the constitution. However, subsequently, because there was another decision which came up by the Supreme Court, that was Gyan Kaur, so it was held that now that is constitutional. So then eclipse was removed. So this is how it works, right? Another instance could be your Article 368 application. So you would all note about the validity of Golaknath's case and state of Punjab. So there was a question about Punjab Security and Land Tenures Act of 1953, which was challenged. Basically, as I told you, that fundamental right to hold and acquire property. But subsequently, the constitution was amended and this right to property was taken away. So the question was whether Article 368 amendment was a challenge, means in this case. So it was said that the it was basically, if you Golaknath, it was overturned in Keshavananda Bharti case, and then it said that Parliament may amend the fundamental rights without changing the basic structure of the Constitution, and actually removed the eclipse from Article 368 to make changes in the fundamental rights. So this is something which which happened in case of doctrine of eclipse. I believe amending provisions would be taken up by Dr. Ashish, so he will be talking about this more. You can get clarification more on this Article 368 part when he takes the session. Well, so with this, I think I should move with the next doctrine, and I think Shrestha talks about the court has that until the government formulates a law regarding instant triple talaq, there would be an injunction against husbands. Okay, yes. But this injunction is not doctrine of eclipse, Shrestha. I believe if that particular injunction is given, this would not be doctrine of eclipse. Doctrine of eclipse basically would apply to the pre-constitutional laws only. So this is what is the point. However, in a general parlance, you can say that it was eclipsed for some period of time. Yeah. So let us move ahead and talk about doctrine of severability. Doctrine of severability is quite interesting, and it was not for the first time that Constitution recognized doctrine of severability. Doctrine of severability as a concept was very much into existence already in English judicial system. And if we go back, we could find the first case was this Nordenfeld versus Maxim Nordenfeld, guns, ammunition, 1876. And this was a case which involved a contract, and this contract had this line. I think it has become very small, but I will read it for you. The plaintiff would not indulge in any production of guns and other weapons anywhere in the world, and the plaintiff not compete with the defendant in any way for 25 years. So this was the contract. And in fact, plaintiff was gun manufacturer. He sold his gun factory to someone, and whosoever bought the gun factory imposed this particular condition in the contract. Now, when this contract came to adjudication, the question came up because it was, I hope you people have read Contract Act. If you have read Contract Act, there is something which is known as contract in restraint of trade, right? Anyone can remember the section, restraint of trade? Yes, Tarun, that's great. So contract in restraint of trade was the question, and the court said that okay, fine, due to contract in restraint of trade, this whole contract doesn't become void, but if you can separate the parts of this contract and one part is enforceable, the other part is not enforceable, the non-enforceable part would go and the enforceable part would stay. So this is what what is basically the doctrine of severability. So this is exactly, yes, Ajay, it is section 27 under Contract Act. You would see here in this particular slide, there is a blue pencil, right? So this drawing of line between this enforceable and non-enforceable contract is also referred to as blue pencil rule. So that is blue pencil approach. Yes, Tanish, very good. So this is blue pencil approach wherein you draw a line and then you find out the difference. So this is what was held in this case. If you look at in Indian scenario, there is a case, very famous case, RDMC versus Union of India, which involved basically the price chits matter. And it said that the price competitions, maybe if it is in gambling nature, then that should be separated with the skill-based prizes. So that was the case, which was RMDC versus Union of India, and it laid down also the different parameters on the basis of which you can apply the doctrine of severability. So basically, you also need to, and in this they have said, the RMDC, they said that you need to look at the intention of the legislature. So legislative intent as a tool of interpretation of statutes is taken into consideration, and you determine as to what were the factors, whether they are valid part of the law is severable from the invalid parts. If you see that they are intertwined too much, that they cannot be separated, then ideally speaking, it cannot be separated, because then essence won't come up. So if you see that essence of the law was to promote restraint of trade, then in that situation you cannot protect that law. In case of Nordenfeld. Same, if you look at it, then it further talks about other processes. It also speaks about RMDC also speaks about an important point, and that says about the constitutionality of the legislation. So it says that the courts would start and begin with the thought that the act is the legislation is constitutional, rather than beginning with a thought that it is unconstitutional. So this is how also which is brought up in this particular case. So doctrine of severability basically talks about that. So any question on these two doctrines, any one of you? I hope I made it clear. So basically you have to read them together, and doctrine of severability generally would apply in case of doctrine of eclipse, because when you are talking about eclipsing a provision, the whole act or the legislation doesn't get void. It is only a particular portion of the law which gets void. Yeah. Yes, Shrest. That's a good example. Right? So you will have a plenty of examples on this doctrine of severability. Right? So let's move ahead and talk about the state. Now we are talking about Article 12, Constitution of India tells you the definition of state. Let us read this definition. What it says. It says in this part, and that is what I said, that this applies to the part of this Constitution, part 3 of the Constitution. And it says, unless the context otherwise requires, the state includes the government and parliament of India and the government and the legislature of each states and all local and other authorities within the territory of India under the control of the government of India. So this is something which is the law, pretty simple, very simple 3-line legislation or 3-line provision, but it has got so many cases around this because of the reason there are one, just because of one clause, and that is other authorities. So we will talk about other authorities. So if you look at this definition, it says in this part, and it tries to define state, and it brings 4 things. One is the government and parliament. This is talking about central government, and then government and legislature of the states. It is talking about the state government, and then it talks about local authorities, and it talks about other authorities as well. Now let us talk about one by one. So first, I don't think that there is a challenge as far as the first part is first 2 points are concerned: government of parliament and the state legislature. But let me, if you look at the Constitutional Assembly debate around Article 12 also, you will find that there were not much of a challenge out there. There was only one challenge which was raised, I believe, and there were, I think it was debated only on one day, that is 25th November 1948, and they discussed about it. There was only a challenge about whether there is a need for having a definition of the state for only this part or to the whole constitution. This was a question which was asked by one of the honorable members of CAD, and and also the question was raised as to the term other authority. So if we put other authority, whether there will be confusion or not. This was something which was brought up by one of the members of the Constitutional Assembly debate as a question on the definition of the state, and chairman of the Constitutional Assembly, basically, drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, answered these objections. And if you look at the objection, basically his point was that every citizen must be in the position to claim those rights, and secondly, that they must be binding upon every authority. So purport of the definition of the state is that there is someone who will be bound by the fundamental rights, means enforcement of fundamental rights. So when you say that fundamental rights is granted in part 3 of the Constitution, but against whom? So it is basically against a state, and this definition makes a huge difference, because then you need to you have a clear clarity as to against whom you are proceeding for violation of the fundamental rights. It is not available against normal citizens or maybe corporations. So it is available only against a state, and that is the reason B.R. Ambedkar said that you need to have a clear definition and diversity. A clear definition of this particular concept. But if you look at B.R.'s explanation on the part of the other authorities, it is quite interesting to note. Here it says, therefore, it is quite clear that if fundamental rights are to be clear, then they must be binding not only upon the central government, they must not only be binding upon the provincial government, they must not only be binding upon the government established in Indian states, they must also upon municipalities, even village panchayats and taluk boards. In fact, every authority which has been created by law and which has got certain power to make laws, to make rules, or to make bylaws. So it is quite an expansive. So, and this expansive thought of the definition of state has already been picked up by the Supreme Court, and we will see through the cases now. And they have dealt with this issue in a pragmatic way. And if you will look at the treatment of Article 12 by the Constitution, by the Supreme Court of India, you will find that they have expanded the definition of state to a larger extent. However, they have not done it for themselves. So this is what this is quite interesting. So if you look at it, there is no confusion about the government. So this is quite clear: government and parliament, central government, state government. However, with judiciary, there is a question, and people say that why not judiciary is part of the state? And yeah, Abhishek, that is a good question. Huh? Can UPS can come under the definition of this state? So we'll try to answer this particular question. Why don't we pull it on a poll? Huh? I think let us talk about it. Yeah. Wow. This will set the context basically that how do we read it. Okay. Oh, it is equal, but it's quite interesting, your responses. We are having 32 responses which says 36 responses which says yes. Oh. Yeah, Ajay is saying Ajay Asia case it is not fulfilling. But again, see how there are more number of people they want UPS to be under the state. Well, we will talk about this. Majority of you are saying that it is a state, but I doubt your answer. So it is not a state. But I am quite surprised with this answer. Then you need to read this particular section very carefully, and henceforth we will talk about other authorities in greater detail. Okay, let me talk about it. So judiciary excluded itself, and there is a huge amount of debate. And in fact, you will note that the national there was a commission which was working on the working of the constitution. Yes, Bhavya, UPS was enacted under the state legislature, but you have to look at it. There is a section in the UPS Act which specifically says that in no circumstances the UPS will be given any funding by the state government, or it will claim any funding by the state government, and there is no control, active control of the government on. And these are the tests basically about the state. So we'll talk about it in a while, Bhavya. Okay. But we'll be happy to take your logic. I wish it would have been a state, but it is not a state. Right. Okay. Let me talk about so judiciary. If you have a look at the discussion, you will find Naresh Sridhar Mirajkar case versus State of Maharashtra. Here, the court actually dealt with this issue whether judiciary can be a state or not. You have to look at it from two lenses actually. So if you see judiciary as a state or not, you have to find out that whether judiciary is acting in an administrative capacity or it is acting in a judicial capacity. If it is acting in a judicial capacity, then it is not a state because it doesn't breach anybody's fundamental right. This is what was the logic given under this particular case. So, but however, if you look at it from the perspective of Part 4 of the Constitution, you will find that the judiciary makes regulations as well, means formulates laws in absence of any laws there. So in that context, people argue, and many jurists have said that judiciary should come under the definition of the state, and judiciary should accept that particular definition. But so far, I believe the judiciary is not part of the state. Okay, so judiciary is out of question. Now let us move ahead and talk about local authorities. Local authorities, it was Union of India versus R.C. Jain. You can read this particular case, 1981. And General Clauses Act sufficiently defines local authority, and it basically means municipal committee, district board, body of port commissioners, other authority legally entitled to and entrusted by the government with and control of management of municipal or local fund. So they actually gave, if the government is delegating, or this local authority must be a body which is independent enough, made by a statute or having conferring power by a statute. It should be autonomous, it should be able to raise funds. So that would be the local authority. But you need to also understand here that anybody which doesn't qualify as a local authority, it doesn't get exempted, because that will be caught under the other authorities part. So remaining clause of Article 12 actually brings a lot of agencies into the definition of this state. So the logic of the court, the Supreme Court logic here is that you cannot delegate your essential functions. So it says that basically if we allow state to formulate autonomous bodies, non-statutory bodies, and transfer its funding to them, and just raise their hands that yes, we are not state, won't work. Idea is that the state need to own those particular functions, and the courts have laid down certain tests on the basis of which they decide as to whether it is a state or not. Okay, so we will talk about those tests in a while. Local authority, there is no confusion. So local authority, there is a definition as well, and what is the test there for a local authority is that whether it is having sufficient power, means it has been conferred power by way of a legislation or a judicial order, and whether it is autonomous in its functioning, and whether they are able to raise fund, right? So let us talk about other authorities. Other authorities are very, very important, and it all started with many cases, but the prominent one was Rajasthan State Electricity Board. So this particular case, the challenge was that you all must be knowing that State Electricity Board, government delegated its function of providing electricity, that is essential utilities, to state electricity boards. And the question arose in this, that whether Rajasthan State Electricity Board would be a state under the Article 12 or not. Now herein the court said that, see, this was essential utility functioning, and irrespective of the commercial functions, like you cannot just say that, yeah, this is a commercial function and hence I will not be a state. Now here you need to also understand that what does it mean when somebody says that it is state. One of the primary things which comes up in question is Article 14. So most of these questions which has come up on the definition of the state was in relation to Article 14, and in many cases Article 19. But in most of the cases, the question which primarily arises against a body is under Article 14. So they basically said, there is a discrimination which has been meted out by the state. So state cannot mete out a discrimination. A private body can mete out a discrimination between two people, but a state is not supposed to do that. They have to have the intelligible differentia to differentiate between people, and that is what Article 14 says. So you will have a session on Article 14, and in detail you will learn that. But when I talk about state's definition, basically it is an obligation of the state to perform its function in consonance with the Part 3 of the Constitution, and that is why as much as you expand the definition of the state, more and more entities will come into it. So the idea, the judiciary has done that over a period. They have brought many bodies under the definition of the state. So the tactics, you can say, or you can say the strategy of the government to delegate its functions, essential functions, to someone else has not worked. So in fact, different forms of bodies have been determined as a state, and ultimately now it becomes the responsibility of the government to take care of that situation, or maybe ensure that it doesn't violate the part 3 of the constitution. So in this particular case, it said that court said that irrespective of commercial functions, nothing doing, the state electricity board would be coming under the definition of the state. In case of Sukhdev versus Bhagat, there were three companies which were under the statute. So you must be knowing that the government formulates different agencies under the statute as well. Like for example, LIC of India is under LIC of India Act, ONGC and Finance Corporation. These were three bodies which were under the legislation, and they said that the government plea was, since they are formed under independent legislation, there is no need for them to be state. They are independently governed under the statute, and then we don't have that particular kind of a control. So what is the problem? But ultimately, the court held that that is not the situation. That won't work this way. It is basically you are having a pervasive control ultimately on the affairs of LIC or ONGC. You are having the maximum number of shares, or you are controlling the management. So these were the tests, and in Ajay Asia's case, the test has been clearly laid down, the sixth test, which we will talk about in a while. There was a case, Sabhajit's case, 1975, wherein the non-statutory body like Indian Council of Scientific Research was held that it is not a state, and that was 1975. Watershed movement in Article 12 interpretation was R.D. Shetty versus International Airports Authority. This case is also very important from Article 14 perspective. So 1979 they did this case, and here they elaborated a concept of instrumentality of the state, right? So here this International Airport Authority was a corporation which was incorporated, and they came up with a tender for a canteen, and probably this R.D. Shetty applied and he was not selected. Something happened around that, and then he moved to the court, and wherein the airport authority, International Airport Authority, said that, see, we are an independent body and we came up with a tender. What we have to do with the state? State is something different. So, but court said that no, you basically are an instrumentality of the state because you qualify the test. So we will talk about the test in a while. Then what happened is these things moved, and then Som Prakash versus Union of India, and there was also another case called Central Water Corporation Limited and Brojonath Gandhi, it is 1986, wherein they said that rather than looking at the structure part of it, that whether it is incorporated as a company, whether it is incorporated as a society, or whether it is incorporated as a under the act, or it is a non-statutory or statutory, you should rather look at the concept from the function perspective. So say for example, Central Water Corporation, if that is functioning essentially on behalf of the government, then that will be treated as the state. Similarly, if the government has substantially acquired this Burma Shell company and it is now a government company under the section 617 of the Companies Act, it would be treated as a state. So that was the functional test which was laid down there. In 2002, there was a major change which happened, and they brought up the concept of control test. So they said that if the central government or the state government or the government is controlling the entity, even if it is a private entity and it is being controlled by the government, then in that situation that will become the state for the purpose of Article 12. And in Biman Kishore case, they brought up a concept that is called trappings of the state. So it is basically the the word trappings of the state comes from that this has got the essential nature of the state. So this is something which was brought up. So now let me talk about those essential features. Then I will talk about the telefilms in a while. So these were the tests to determine instrumentality of the state. So what are the tests? These are the 6 tests which was laid down in Ajay Asia's, and it says holding of the corporation's entire share capital by the government. So if any entity is its share capital, entire share capital is held by the government, then in that situation that will be one of the tests. Another is extensive financial assistance. So if there is an extensive financial assistance is given, then it is a instrumentality of the state. A state conferred monopoly status, whether there is a state conferred status. Yeah, Devisha, it laid down that particular test, but I'm talking about Ajay Hasia now. So basically, the fourth one was deep and pervasive state control. So if someone has this government has a deep and pervasive state control, that is, I'm talking about the management and controlling the management of that particular affairs, then that is also an important point. Another important point was function of public importance or closely related to governmental functions. So this was also treated as an important element out here. So functions of public importance or closely related to the governmental functions will be treated as the state, and transferring the government department to a corporation. So many a times it has happened that government has transferred its functions to a corporation. So in those situations also it was said that by transferring your functions to a corporations, you have just changed the entity, but essentially you are a state because you have transferred your own functions. And ultimately it is not about transferring, but it is also having extensive financial assistance, the state comfort. So now all these particular 6 factors, it is not necessary that every of these factors should be present in all the cases. It can be mix of factors, or even one factor can decide as to that it is an instrumentality of the state, of the government. Any question on this instrumentality of the government? Any one of you? Instrumentality of the government, any one of you? And Devisha, if you can clarify your point, I could not get that. What was your point? Yeah. Instrumentality, any one of you? Okay. Yes, Muskan, please go ahead.
Sir, in this has been written that holding the corporation's entire share capital.
Yeah.
So, but don't you think that 51% of the holding makes the company a public company and of the control of the
Yeah.
government?
So yes. So the test here is that Muskan, that just because central government has 51% shares in a company doesn't make it a state.
Okay, sir.
It has to go beyond that. So it must be giving extensive financial assistance, and there should be control. Deep and pervasive state control is also important.
Sir, so all this test, like all these conditions, has to be in consonance.
Not all the tests, but again, I think one of these particular tests may not be helpful. Particularly the shareholding one would not be helpful, because there are cases in which the central government had 51% of the share, but it was not held as a state.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yes.
So am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Devisha.
So actually, I wrote that case when someone said, someone asked the question about whether UPS is enacted. Someone wrote that UPS was enacted under legislature. So I just wrote that point, that why it is not there, because in that case, the two things that were talked about was about the your control and financial assistance. Neither the government has control over us, nor there is any financial assistance by them. So I wrote in that regard.
Right. Very nice. That is exactly is the answer. So you get the answer as well as you answer it. Very nice. Thank you. Let me now talk about another important point, and that was Pradeep Kumar Biswas. So this is the latest point wherein they talked about control, and Justice Ruma Paul wrote this decision. And though there were 2 minority decisions also in this, but this is the majority view, wherein they said that whether in the light of the cumulative facts and established body, the financially, functionally, and administratively. So these are the 3 points. So UPS test also you can bring it here. Financially, functionally and administratively dominated or under the control of the government. So in these, any of these particular things is not met in case of UPS. Such control must be particular to the body in question and must be pervasive. When you say pervasive, it is on on a day-to-day basis. On the other hand, when the control is merely regulatory, whether under statute or otherwise, it would not serve to make the body a state. So if it is only just regulatory, so in this case, the legislation or maybe our visitor who happens to be the governor is just regulatory in nature, or maybe there will be a UGC who will be regulating us. That is just a regulation part of it. Financially, functionally, and administratively, the UPS is independent. I hope I gave you this particular answer very clearly, right? So this is what happened in Pradeep Kumar Biswas. There was Pradeep Kumar Biswas changed a situation also. And what was the change? Can anyone tell me? I discussed one case which got repealed because of Pradeep Kumar Biswas. Any one of you, if you would have noticed in this slide. Very nice, Raghav. Yes. Vimarsh, right, but Ajay Hasya case was not repealed. Yes, it was considered and it was said that it is not rigid. Very nice. And okay, you people are all expert. That's great. So that calls for now a quiz. So let us have a quiz, and this quiz basically is a simple quiz. You have to answer in yes and no. I will give 30 seconds for to you for each question. It will be in poll mode, so you can utilize it, and then maybe I can give you a brief commentary there. So let me take you to the quiz. What you have to answer here is that I am asking you whether this entity is a state or not. Okay. So just give me the answer when I ask you the question. You can use also the chat box to make any further comments, but you can utilize this whether this is a state or not. For each question, I will give you 30 seconds. I have got 10 questions, so we'll do it fast. Then we will have a commentary. Okay, come on. Be quick in your response, right? So I have got about still waiting for 658 responses. Let me set my stopwatch so that I don't waste time here, and then I will tell you the result, and then we can go ahead with another question. Okay, so for this question, let me tell you. So we have got 58 yes, 20 no, and 44 no response. So 44 people are clueless, and probably they are waiting for the evening tea, and we are going to finish only at 1800 hours. So you can see here the Council for the Indian School Certificate Examination. It was held in the case of Vibhu Kapoor versus Council of ICSE Examination, that it is a state, as it is a society registered under the Society Registration Act and imparting education and holding examination. So this was held to be a state, though it was a non-statutory body. Let me put your another question, and the another question goes like this. And this is your another next poll, and whether this is a state or not. You need to be a bit fast because I have started my stop clock. So it is 25 seconds. Now 3 more seconds to go. Yeah, we'll be quick. And here we go. I stop your this. This is the response. 59 say yes, 6 says no, 52 are no response. So be a bit faster here. So yes, 59 people are correct. This is the situation where an aided school, because it is substantially receiving 95% of the expense of a government grant, and it is also subject to the regulations. I could not type the complete thing, but I give you the answer. So people who have not responded, 6 people, I presume that they were looking for more information or more facts, and 52 people who did not respond were looking for a complete detailed thing. But sometimes you have to answer quickly. Okay, so let me close this question. Let me have another question for you. And this question is basically a simple one. And this says, yeah, whether this is a state or not. Okay, it's quite becoming quite interesting. Find that the confusion has increased. So here you go, and we have got 53 responses which say yes, 23 which says no. So I think there was an answer given by Vimarsh. So you can see Indian Institute of Chemical Biology further reaffirmed in G. Bassi Reddy. So International Crops Research Institute, right? So you can note it is a state as held in Pradeep Kumar Biswas. Exactly, this particular test applies to this, and this is a state. So 53, yes, correct. Now let me talk about another question. In the meanwhile, you can also utilize the chat box if you have some comment, question, or anything which you feel is the people who have answered no, or they have any further additional clarification. I would be happy to answer them. Let me take you to another question, and this question is this. And this question goes like this: whether this is the state or not. Yeah. Okay. Right. This seems to be a more clearer proposition to you, but still we are having some responses which surprises me. But still we will take that. Probably you people are not listening very carefully, the people who have answered no. So we discussed this particular matter. So if you will note, Sabajit's case said that CSIR is not a state. However, Pradeep Kumar Biswas case actually overturned the decision in Sabajit, and then it held CSIR to be a state. And subsequently, all these kind of bodies were considered as the state, as it was held in chemical biology's case. So the Chemical Biology Association was also considered as a state. Okay, so this is the situation. Yeah, Rukmani, what do you say? There was also a case similar to this question, I guess, Vidyadhar Pandey versus Vidyut Shiksha. It's an autonomous organization. Okay. Autonomous organizations, if they meet the test laid down in Ajay Asia and Pradeep Kumar Biswas, they will be considered as a state. Depends on fact to fact, Rukmini. Well, okay, now let me talk about another case, and this is the case which is, so this is your poll, here we go, and here we go. Yes, this is your poll. Just let us have a response. Okay. Okay, pretty interesting. So we have the response here, and I see it is like pretty people are now getting hang of it, and ultimately they think that they have got everything out there. Yes, uh, quite happy to see these particular responses. So this is your response, which you see here. But friends, sometimes Supreme Court gives you a lot of surprises, and this is the surprise. So surprise is that 80 people are incorrect in this situation because there was a case. This case is Chandra Mohan Khanna versus National Council of Education Research and Training 1991 for SCC, wherein they held NCERT not to be a state. Okay, so that I hope it was a quite surprising thing for you also. So yeah, right. So two people said that correct answer. So no is the correct answer for this particular case. Interesting one. Let me take you to another one, and this is basically another case, and let us talk about this case. Just post the question, and it is all right. So here you go, and this is the question. Okay. Very nice. So 54, 51, 54, 52. Okay, so let me show you the responses. So here you can see there are 60 people who are saying yes, and there are 13 people who are saying no. 43 people have no response, and this time this particular answer goes to no response. Okay, so ideally speaking, Sainik School Society Registration Act is something which doesn't give you the complete information. Though in this case, if you are aware about this case and you have answered yes, then in that situation you are correct, because there was a Sainik school which was registered, but this information which I gave you was incomplete. So sometimes you have to get the complete information and then answer. So probably this was a question wherein this was a tricky, like it was a tricky question just in. So just forget this particular question. But here one thing is very clear, that you, as per the test. So why I pose this question? Because you cannot just answer a question on the basis of the name. So say Sainik School Society, it seems that it must be government, right? So don't answer your questions like that. You need to have a look at the parameters which is laid down in Pradeep Kumar Biswas as well as your Ajay Asya case to determine as to whether that is the case or not, right? Now you will say that we need to have more information for the next poll. So this is exactly what will happen. Let me talk about the another poll. Let me talk about this poll, and then let us see whether this is a state or not. Yeah, whether this is a state. Yeah, Priyanshi, you asked a good question whether it was funded fully by the government. I think it was a question relating to Sainik School. Well, this was is quite interesting one. So we have got 43 responses, 44 responses which says no. So yes, you are correct here when you say no, because in this case, this was a case which was basically, if I may give you the citation, it is RM Thomas versus Cochin Refineries Limited, wherein it was held that it is not state. M Thomas. Yes, Devisha. So you people have answered it well. Let me post a last question to you, and then we will have 15 minutes of discussion and questions, and then we will go ahead. Give me a second. I will ask the question. Yeah, I am listening to your raising hand. Give me a second. Okay. Yeah. So this is your question, whether this is a state or not. Just tell me. Okay, it's quite interesting. So people are competing against yes and no. This is what is happening exactly in this poll. 53 yet to answer. Okay, so this is again a surprise case by Supreme Court, and this was basically Tekraj versus Union of India. And this case, it held that it is not a state, but you will be surprised to know that this was a institute which is, received grant from the central government. At the same time, Prime Minister, President, Vice President are its honorary members. But in spite of that, the court said that no, it is not a state. Probably they are just honorary members, so they don't have an active control. This may be one reason. Secondly, all institutions who receive grant from the government may not be categorized as a state. So it depends on the substantial control part of it. So after Pradeep Kumar Biswas, you need to also look at it, that what kind of a control is there on that particular body or an organization. So that is something which needs to be looked at. So this is what I think your poll is over. Now let me take you to, okay, so this slide is just like that. So Kumar Biswas we discussed. Now let me tell you about my understanding of how this state thing operates. Now I'll share my experience. I have worked with government. Government means a quasi-judicial body, that is your Competition Commission of India. While working at Competition Commission of India, I was also associated with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and then I came down to autonomous body, that is IICA. So I worked with them also. Part 3 of the Constitution definitely imposes a significant, pressure on the state government. And it is very important, the government, it is very important also, because if you don't have that kind of a pressure, the government would become unruly. And that is why this check and balance is very, very important. So you need to have a parameter on the basis of which you touch on the touchstone on which you will test performance of the state. At the same time, you will see that they are not infringing upon the rights of the people. So it is very important for the people to have their rights, fundamental rights, and the state needs to protect them. And this conflict between individual and state is something which is dealt with by the judiciary. Judiciary has a look at it. They also do judicial review. Now, in the present circumstances, present scenarios, and from a practical point of view, why this topic is important for you is that whenever suppose you are going for litigation and filing a writ petition, the first question which you need to answer in your pleadings is whether your writ petition qualifies to be admitted as it is against a state or not. If it is not against a state, then it won't be admitted. So writ jurisdiction, writ filing, Article 32 would be available only in situations where it is filed against a state. So this is very, very important point which must be noted. With this, over to you. Any questions? Any clarifications? I will be happy. I think Devisha or Devanshu, somebody raised hand. You can ask the question. Yeah. Please go ahead and ask your question, any one of you. We still have few minutes. Okay, seems all your questions are answered. If that is the case, then thank you. It was wonderful speaking to you, and that gave me an opportunity to revisit. Yeah, go ahead. Any one of you.
Sir, this is Gautam.
Gautam.
If there is no questions from the participant, I would like to ask some question. And
okay, you want to ask a question? Please go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, first there is, I will not say an observation. I will just say a mere opinion on governance part and self-governance part. So the preamble of the Constitution, where it says that we the people give ourselves to this Constitution. So we have given this Constitution to ourselves. We elect our own representative. So it's already a self-governance process, as far as I feel. The Constitution is a document from where you inherently got your power to govern yourself only. So we are a self-governing country. So that is my one opinion. The second part is.
Go ahead, Gautam, please. Yeah.
Sir, second part is with relation to private schools or university being covered under the definition of a state. Somebody raised regarding UPS and all. So if somebody has read SRM University case, or if somebody has referred Marwari Balika Vidyalaya case, so there are instances where private schools or colleges are also covered under the definition of a state. It's not predominantly a neutral thing, but it's different on a case-to-case basis. So, like if there is employment dispute and a faculty or a non-teaching staff feels that his deprivation of employment is illegal, so in that case, the Supreme Court said that the teacher, the professor can file writ petition. So filing of a writ petition was allowed, meaning that for instance to instance basis, you can be covered under a state. This is my take.
Not exactly, Gautam. I think the case which you are referring to there, it completely depends as to what, again, you have to go back to the control part of it. So if you are, see, the universities, there are two kinds of universities. One is called 12B University. If you are receiving 12B grant from the UPS, so UGC, then in that particular situation, you will have that particular right to file the state, because you are substantially governed by the grants and that granting agency. But if you are not covered under 12B, then there is no question that you will be coming under the state. This is one point which like one can refer to. But still, I am not aware about that particular case. I will go through it. Yeah, Ashutosh.
Sir, what Gautam is saying, that is a little bit right. What the Supreme Court have heard in number of cases, that of course there will be reasonable classification between private universities, central universities, and the state universities. So it doesn't mean that we will give all the rights to the private universities to all the petitioners, but for a very, very limited purpose, not for many of the things, but for a very, very limited purpose, irrespective of whether it's a private university or private school, it can be considered as a state for a very, very limited. And so this jurisprudence have developed from 2015 onwards, not before that. Okay. It's a very, very recent phenomenon. There's a Justice Arun Mishra judgment on that particular point, that we are not saying that it is per se state, but depending on the facts of the case for a very, very limited purpose, as for the example, employer-employee relationship.
Yeah. So this is a roundabout interpretation, Ashutosh, and I believe it is a, I have not gone through that decision, but I will go through it and I'll write a very serious critique on that decision, because I believe, first of all, then in that situation, the Supreme Court should come under the scanner of state rather than elaborating this particular definition of state. They can say anything, but that
No,
doesn't
sir.
mean that that will be the law which will be made. But it is not
So
about
you,
defending or talking about it. It's about principles. So if you look at it
yes, sir.
from
Yes,
that
sir.
particular perspective, you need to meet the test. If you're
Yes,
not
sir.
meeting the test which is laid down, then in that
The Supreme
situation, I
Court,
understand many a
the
times
Supreme
Supreme
Court
Court or
relied
the
on
court.
this. The Supreme Court relied on this judgment also, where ICSE board was held as a state for limited
Okay.
purpose. So because at the end,
ICSE
because
board
ICSE
which was
board
held
is
at examination
because
and all those particular
yes,
purposes.
sir.
Okay.
Because at the end,
Mhm.
providing education is a public purpose, so they are relying on that particular aspect only. It doesn't mean
Right.
that anyone can go and file a writ petition against any private university.
Yeah. So Aparajita, this RTI doesn't depend on the state actually. So RTI is a different. It is basically public authority. So you have to look at the definition. RTI definition of a state and Part 3 definition of a state are two different things. Yeah. So this is one point, but that was quite an interesting point. Gautam, thank you for that point. So I will also revisit it and maybe have a look at it. That gives me a material to write also. So it is quite an interesting one. And what was your first point? I forgot that. Would like to
Sir,
respond to it.
first point was on
Okay,
self-governance
yeah,
part.
constitutional governance. Yeah, now I recollect. So yes, definitely you are saying that this constitution. But see, I always look at this constitutional debates and discussion from 2 points. One is that you do an academic discussion. Okay, it is perfectly fine. Another point is you do a practical discussion. The point is that we say that we have given this particular constitution to ourselves. But at the same time, when we are saying we give this constitution to ourselves and will be governed through it, are we following it? Is the question. Then
That is
there would
where
not have been.
the
Then
point
there would
of
not have been. People are questioning the parliament itself, and sitting in the parliament, questioning the parliament, decisions of the parliament. They want to tear the bill, which has been passed by the parliament. So that is something which is there. We are like when we are talking about definition of a state and its accountability. So it has to be both ways, right? So accountability has to come both ways. It is by the citizens at the same time the state as well. So it is a balance that has to be made. It cannot be a question that is why we started with that self-governance debate actually. That what do we mean? It is like only the state who will be governing, or we need to govern ourselves. Okay. Yes, Rohan. Good point. Okay. What else? So I think it was wonderful interacting with you all. Thanks a lot for joining this session. It was wonderful. I think today is a holiday, but still you made it to this session. Appreciate all your efforts. And I hope I contributed something to your knowledge, but I learned a lot. That is what I could say. After a long time, I revisited Constitution. So for me, it was wonderful learning. Looking forward to have more sessions with you people on Constitution, because that is something which opens up. Every time you read Constitution, something new comes up. This is the beauty of this particular subject. Thank you, Ashutosh sir, and Gautam. Thank you
Thank
for
you, sir.
organizing. Yeah, thank you.
thank you so much, sir, for devoting some time for our cause. I hope this discussion would is a very fruitful one, and we also get to learn a lot. So from tomorrow, we are entering directly into fundamental right. From Article 14, we will cover the Golden Triangle. So hope to see you all there. Uh, Thank you, Asutosh sir. Once again, thank you, Vijay sir. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you, Gautam.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye.